Hello, beautiful community. We're trying to accept something here that's difficult to accept about our democracies and in turn about the Western policy for Ukraine. I want to frame that today for us via just a 4-point thread I've written for us. But I want to do something that is completely impossible to do in a Twitter thread, but using the skeletal materials that the thread gives us. So let's go. Virtually the entire expert community is arguing for the upside of supporting Ukraine to win. That's to say, an upside for us here in the West. Right? Forget about saving lives in Ukraine. That can be abstracted away. It's in our strategic interests to help Ukraine. And the expert community is arguing for that. Nearly in unison, if you look in particular at regional experts, people who really know the area and people who really know the Putin regime. They warn the West about being complacent. But the problem is not complacency, actually. And you see this sort of replicating pattern with a couple of experts writing forceful pieces about the need to sustain and increase support for Ukraine, and then everybody in the expert community saying, well, that argument looks good, well done, I'm going to make one too, and she's made one, and he's made one, and it's fantastic. And it's very important to be respectful here, and I don't just mean polite, I mean respectful, because we can't live without experts as a democracy, and we've got to cherish our experts, and we've got to feel compassionate about them. We've got to feel protective of them. I mean, they are, insofar as they're tethered to truth, they are an essential counter-majoritarian institution that keeps our democracies going. Now, that's on the premise that we don't stretch the concept expert to include various kinds of popular and self-serving communicators who might be doing other kinds of good or ill. But I'm focusing on people we can legitimately call experts and just expressing the need for compassion toward them. And that's especially so because a lot of them are struggling with this. They feel the need to tell their point of view, that, gosh, I think it really makes sense for us to do this strategic step of sustaining help for Ukraine. Because it's not help for Ukraine, it's a strategic move. But at the same time, I keep making this argument, they all feel I keep making this argument, and am I not just dropping little, bits of water into a bucket with a hole? And my answer to that question is yes. That doesn't mean that you stop dropping the water into the bucket with the hole, because you've got to do something, and because sometimes small differences can still be made, and because, fabricated hope can have constructive and real-world positive results sometimes, and fabricated hope, fabricated optimism is sometimes better than no hope and no optimism. So I don't think the expert community is doing anything wrong, but if you look at what they're doing sideways, epistemically, if you like, they are dropping, extra bits of water into this bucket without really thinking much about the hole that's in the bucket. That's understandable. I mean, in a certain way, that's not their expertise. Their expertise might be that region or Russia or the Putin regime or Ukraine. But we've got to be honest about that hole. So let's move on to that. Because if we're not honest about it, there is a risk that all of these wonderful and persuasive arguments by experts will lead us to the false conclusion that the real problem is sloppy thinking, we're not understanding the threat that Putin poses properly, and lack of willpower. So saying, come on, you Westerners, and then saying, here are 3 really powerful arguments, that should therefore do it, right? If the problem is just a lack of willpower and perhaps confusion, but it's not. So what is the problem? This is the second tweet. Western democracies are in crisis. There is such a thing as democratic capacity. What a democracy is capable of relative to its health. This creates a situation in which we need to do something, but cannot do it because we lack democratic capacity. What a democracy that has solidarity, that has a decent level of trust, that has a shared fact world that its citizens exist inside, can do, is different to what a democracy without these things can do. A democracy with these things could have a leader make a very powerful argument and carry the population with them. But a leader making a powerful argument today may well just generate as much extra distrust, not just in the leader's views, but in the leader as a representation of a certain set of institutions in which one's losing trust, might generate as much distrust as conviction that the leader is actually making a point that matters. So it's difficult. It's really difficult. And I just want to say something really emotional here because it's enormously important. We are yet to accept what is happening to our democracies. We don't accept it yet. I think some of us still think it's a kind of a bounce up, bounce down pattern whereby it'll all come back, that the democratic backsliding is just a kind of aberration, or it's a blip, and then there'll be an up, and there could be another down, and there'll be an up. There's a lot of people who feel that. And then there are also a lot of people who don't know what to feel, and they just feel scared. And I can't tell you how much I feel a lot of people feeling that. That is just so palpable to me. How many people are feeling scared because this stuff doesn't make sense? Like, why is our democracy declining? Why are our institutions both weakening, but also, luckily, remaining strong enough so as to be one of the last barriers keeping us protected from anti-democratic politicians? What has gone wrong? And is it us? Did we do something to create this? With policies we did during a period when things looked safe and stable, relatively speaking? Or is it something that's come out of the blue? What, why, what, how? And really? Is this real? Like, is it really? Is it happening? It's not happening. It's not happening. Is it happening? It's happening. So, all you need to do is just reflect on how people feel about Trump's election in 2016, or about how they're going to feel about what is today the single most likely outcome, which is Trump winning in 2024. Enormous consequences of that, if that were to happen, we will spend time reflecting on. So we haven't done acceptance yet, and you don't do acceptance by just announcing we've got to do acceptance. So when I'm telling myself and you, let's accept this, I'm not saying that we've got to wake up tomorrow accepting it. It's always a dance between acceptance and refusal to accept, and sometimes refusal to accept what you need to accept can actually help you fight some of the bad stuff going on, and so on. But we haven't accepted it as much as we need to, and we're still trying to look away. We're trying to face our challenges with our back to them. And that's why here it's very important for us to keep talking about this. But also, the way I'm thinking of the main channel is in part a place to talk not just with hope, that's the word I always use, and of course love, but also with warmth and acceptance about some of the difficulties that we have that we can improve on, but we can't entirely resolve, that affect everything, and as we know very well here, as affect geopolitics. One thing our democratic capacity doesn't allow us, this is the third tweet, is to come up with a proper strategy for European security or global security for that reason. And here is the equation. A lack of strategy plus democratic decline equals a permanent lack of strategy. And so that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to come up with a strategy, frame a strategy, and try to get a public conversation going about that strategy. But we've got to be realistic about the holes in the bucket we're dealing with. We've got to realize that our boats are out at sea. They're not sinking, but they're not safely in the bay. And that means we can't do certain things that we're at sea. Right? Can't open all the doors. We can't just freely wander around the top of the boat, and so on. And we've got to be careful about how we negotiate the waves. So it's a paradoxical and challenging demand on us that easily deflates a lot of people, because a lot of people want a lot of hope, and a lot of hope fast. They don't want a situation where hope is something that you always have to keep exploring and re-exploring about whether there are enough materials for it, or whether the materials before us indicate that we should despair, right? And I reject despair. I think there's plenty to be hopeful about. But at the same time, there's no easy satisfaction here that you gain by reflecting on how things actually are for us. And that's challenging for a lot of people and makes people want to turn away. Next, last tweet. Without a strategy for European security, the West cannot help Ukraine win. Without sound democratic capacity, the West cannot develop a strategy. This not. No strategy, no good policy on the Russia-Ukrainian war, right? And no democratic capacity, no strategy that is needed for the good policy for the Russia-Ukrainian war. It's this not, and not fatigue or complacency or false views about Putin's project, that is our main obstacle. Not our only obstacle, but our main obstacle. And in a rather hopeful, although that's a matter of sensibility, but that's a hopeful sentiment, Sasha Redkin, about whose book we'll talk soon, said, it's a circular explanation, she said at the end of the thread. Inaction leads to lack of capacity, which leads to inaction. There are fruits and there are roots in this ugly plant. And I think that's absolutely right. And I say inaction and lack of strategy scares the bejesus out of citizens, further reducing their trust in institutions, further reducing the capacity of these institutions to come up with a strategy. Now, the fact that it is a spiral like that does not mean we can solve it, but it does mean that we can slow it. And here we're in the realm of fabricated hope, partial success, partial improvement. But the bottom line is that even though the leading figures in the Biden administration would certainly not articulate things the way I just have, but they feel it's not in our interest to help Ukraine more. They feel it's not in our interest to help Ukraine more given our current democratic capacity. Right? So I'm not introducing a new concept. I'm actually introducing a concept that conditions the action in the major centers of power. That's why it's so important to name it, or name it something, right? So that absolutely conditions how major Western powers act. And that's why I want to say to the experts with whose constructive and positive articles we started, keep going and thank you. But also, let's reflect more on, as it were, the address to which we are sending all of these envelopes. And is this address a ship without holes in the bay, or is it a ship out at sea in a storm that is not sinking, but has a couple of holes? That's it for today. Lots of love. Soonishly see you too on the main channel with a really big, interesting video. Bye bye.